Good afternoon and welcome to Teen Book Tuesday. I'm Lorie and I'm the teen librarian at Manlius Library. And today I'm going to tell you about Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. It's the first in a series of books, the Wayward Children series, and there are now 5 books available in the series. It's the story of Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. You see, children have always disappeared under the right conditions. They slip through the shadows under a bed, or maybe in a dark basement. They tumble down rabbit holes, into old wells. They get lost in the back of the closet, and they end up somewhere else. Somewhere magical, somewhere dangerous, a little bit of both, maybe. But magical lands, they'll send back used up magical children. And when they come back, they're changed. Some, like our main character Nancy, are desperate to find a way back to places their families don't believe in. They're thought strange, different, sometimes they're even thought mad. Enter Eleanor West. She was once one of those travelers, and now she runs a home for them, the Wayward Children, helping them readjust to their new reality, giving them someone to trust, someone that believes them, a little bit of stability in their lives. Let me read a little bit, introduce you to Nancy and Eleanor West. Chapter 1. Coming Home, Leaving Home. The habit of narration, of crafting something miraculous out of the commonplace, was hard to break. Narration came naturally after a time spent in the company of talking scarecrows or disappearing cats. It was, in its own way, a method of keeping oneself grounded, connected to the thin thread of continuity that ran through all lives, no matter how strange they might become. Narrate the impossible things, turn them into a story, and they could be controlled. So, the manor sat in the center of what would have been considered a field had it not been used to frame a private home. The grass was perfectly green, the trees clustered around the structure perfectly pruned, and the garden grew in a profusion of colors that normally existed together only in a rainbow or in a child's toy box. The thin black ribbon of the driveway curved from the distant gate to form a loop in front of the manor itself, feeding elegantly into a slightly wider waiting area at the base of a porch. A single car pulled up, tawdry yellow and seeming somewhat shabby against the carefully curated scene. The rear passenger door slammed, and the car pulled away again, leaving a teenage girl behind. She was tall and willowy and couldn't have been more than 17. There was still something of the unformed around her eyes and mouth, leaving her a work in progress, meant to be finished by time. She wore black jeans, black ankle boots with tiny black buttons, marching like soldiers from toe to calf. And she wore white, a loose tank top, the faux pearl bands around her wrists, and she had a ribbon the color of pomegranate seeds tied around the base of her ponytail. Her hair was bone white, streaked with runnels of black, like oil spilled on a marble floor, and her eyes were pale as ice. She squinted in the daylight. From the look of her, it had been quite some time since she had seen the sun. Her small wheeled suitcase was bright pink, covered with cartoon daisies. She had not, in all likelihood, purchased it herself. Raising her hand to shield her eyes, the girl looked toward the manor, pausing when she saw the sign that hung from the porch eaves. Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, it read in large letters. Below, in smaller letters, it continued, no solicitation, no visitors, no quests. The girl blinked. The girl lowered her hand, and slowly the girl made her way toward the steps. On the 3rd floor of the manor, Eleanor West let go of the curtain and turned toward the door while the fabric was still fluttering back into its original position. She appeared to be a well-preserved woman in her late 60s, although her true age was closer to 100. Travel through the lands she had once frequented had a tendency to scramble the internal clock, making it difficult for time to get a proper grip upon the body. Some days she was grateful for her longevity, which had allowed her to help so many more children than she would ever have lived to see if she hadn't opened the doors she had, if she had never chosen to stray from her proper path. Other days she wondered whether this world would ever discover that she existed, that she was little Eli West, the wayward girl, somehow alive after all these years, and what would happen to her when that happened. Still, for the time being, her back was strong, and her eyes were as clear as they had been on the day when, as a girl of 7, she had seen the opening between the roots of a tree on her father's estate. If her hair was white now, and her skin was soft with wrinkles and memories, well, that was no matter at all. There was still something unfinished around her eyes. She wasn't done yet. She was a story, not an epilogue, and if she chose to narrate her own life one word at a time as she descended the stairs to meet her newest arrival, that wasn't hurting anyone. Narration was a hard habit to break, after all. Sometimes it was all a body had. Nancy stood frozen in the center of the foyer, her hand locked on the handle of her suitcase as she looked around, trying to find her bearings. She wasn't sure what she had been expecting from the special school her parents were sending her to, but it certainly hadn't been this. This elegant country home. The walls were papered in an old-fashioned floral print of roses and twining clematis vines, and the furnishings, such as they were in this intentionally under-furnished entryway, were all antiques. Good, well-polished wood with brass fittings that matched the curving sweep of the banister. The floor was cherry wood, and when she glanced upward trying to move her eyes without lifting her chin, she found herself looking at an elaborate chandelier shaped like a blooming flower. "That was made by one of our alumni, actually," said a voice. Nancy wrenched her gaze from the chandelier and turned it toward the stairs. The woman who was descending was thin, as elderly women sometimes were, but her back was straight, and the hand resting on the banister seemed to be using it only as a guide, not as any form of support. Her hair was as white as Nancy's own, without the streaks of defiant black, and styled in a puffball of a perm, like a dandelion that had gone to seed. She would have looked perfectly respectable, if not for her electric orange trousers, paired with a hand-knit sweater knit of rainbow wool and a necklace of semi-precious stones in a dozen colors, all of them clashing. Nancy felt her eyes widen despite her best efforts and hated herself for it. She was losing hold of her stillness one day at a time. Soon she would be as jittery and unstable as any of the living, and then she would never find her way back home. "It's virtually all glass, of course, except for the bits that aren't," continued this woman, seemingly untroubled by Nancy's blatant staring. "I'm not at all sure how you make that sort of thing. Probably by melting sand, I assume. I contributed those large teardrop-shaped prisms at the center, however. All 12 of them were of my making. I'm rather proud of that." The woman paused, apparently expecting Nancy to say something. Nancy swallowed. Her throat was so dry these days, and nothing seemed to chase the dust away. "If you don't know how to make glass, how did you make the prisms?" she asked. The woman smiled. "Out of my tears, of course. Always assume the simplest answer is the true one here, because most of the time it will be. I'm Eleanor West. Welcome to my home. You must be Nancy." "Yes," Nancy said slowly. "How did you—" "Well, you're the only student we were expecting to receive today. There aren't as many of you as there once were. Either the doors are getting rarer, or you're all getting better about not coming back. Now be quiet a moment and let me look at you." Eleanor descended the last 3 steps and stopped in front of Nancy, studying her intently for a moment before she walked in a slow circle around her. Tall, thin, rather pale. You must have been someplace with no sun. But no vampires, I think, given the skin on your neck. Jack and Jill will be awfully pleased to meet you. They get tired of all the sunlight and sweetness people bring here." "Vampires?" Nancy said blankly. "Those aren't real." "None of this is real, my dear. Not this house, not this conversation, not those shoes you're wearing, which are several years out of style if you're trying to reacclimatize yourself to the ways of your peers, and are not proper morning shoes if you're trying to hold fast to your recent past. And not either one of us. Real is a 4-letter word, and I'll thank you to use it as little as possible while you live under my roof." Eleanor stopped in front of Nancy again. It's the hair that betrays you. Were you in an underworld, or a netherworld? You can't have been in an afterlife. No one comes back from those. Nancy gaped at her mouth moving silently as she tried to find her voice. The woman said those things, those cruelly impossible things, so casually, like she was asking after nothing more important than Nancy's vaccination records. Eleanor's expression transformed, turning soft and apologetic. Oh, I see I've upset you. I'm afraid I have a tendency to do that. I went to a nonsense world, you see, 6 times before I turned 16. And while I eventually had to stop crossing over, I never quite learned to rein my tongue back in. You must be tired from your journey and curious about what's to happen here. Is that so? I can show you to your room as soon as I know where you fall on the compass. I'm afraid it really does matter for things like housing. You can't put a nonsense traveler in with someone who went walking through logic, not unless you feel like explaining a remarkable amount of violence to the local police. They do check up on us here, even if we can usually get them to look the other way. It's all part of our remaining accredited as a school, although I suppose we're more of a sanitarium of sorts. I do like that word, don't you? Sanitarium. It sounds so official, while meaning absolutely nothing at all. I don't understand anything you're saying right now, said Nancy. She was ashamed to hear her voice come out in a tinny squeak, even as she was proud of herself for finding it at all. Eleanor's face softened further. You don't have to pretend anymore, Nancy. I know what you've been going through, where you've been. I went through something a long time ago when I came back from my own voyages. This isn't a place for lies or for pretending everything is all right. We know everything is not all right. If it were, you wouldn't be here. Now, where did you go? I don't. Forget about words like nonsense and logic. We can work those out those details later. Where did you go? I went to the halls of the dead. Saying the words aloud was almost a painful relief. Nancy froze again, staring into space as if she could hear her voice hanging there, shining garnet dark and perfect in the air. Then she swallowed, still not chasing away the dryness, and said, I was looking for a bucket in the cellar of our house, and I found this door I'd never seen before. When I went through, I was in a grove of pomegranate trees. I thought I'd fallen and hit my head. I kept going because the air had smelled so sweet and the sky had been velvet black, spangled with points of diamond light that didn't flicker at all, only burned constant and cold. Because the grass had been wet with dew and the trees had been heavy with fruit. Because she had wanted to know what was at the end of the long path between the trees, and because she hadn't wanted to turn back before she understood everything. Because the first time in forever she'd felt like she was going home. And that feeling had been enough to move her feet, slowly at first, and then faster and faster, until she'd been running through the clean night air and nothing else had mattered or would ever matter again. How long were you gone? The question was meaningless. Nancy shook her head. Forever? Years? I was there for years. I didn't want to come back. Ever. I know, dear. Eleanor's hand was gentle on Nancy's elbow, guiding her toward the door behind the stairs. The old woman's perfume smelled of dandelions and ginger snaps, a combination about as nonsensical as everything else about her. Come with me. I have the perfect room for you. And that's Eleanor West and Nancy. When Nancy gets to the school, she struggles to fit in. All she wants is to go back through her door to find the Hall of the Dead again. But she does start to make a place for herself. She makes friends. She makes enemies. But she fits in. And then the darkness arrives. No one can really explain it. Murders start, and everything. The kids, the school, Eleanor, everything is threatened. Nancy and her friends have a mystery to solve. Where is the darkness coming from? Who has it brought with it? They need to figure out who is behind the murders at the school so that their world doesn't just collapse in yet again. Every Hearted Doorway is a clever and exciting portal fantasy. It will turn the world upside down and open new doors and broken doors in imaginations. It's short, it's under 200 pages, and it's very fast paced. It's plot driven, it's got really well crafted characters. They're believable, as is their magic. It's a well crafted fantasy. It's dark, and sometimes it's funny. It will make you wonder at that particular shadow in the corner, or perhaps that strange glint of light in the distance just beyond your vision. As I said earlier, Every Hearted Doorway is the first in a series called The Wayward Children. All 5, there are 5 now, all 5 are available in some form, ebook or e-audiobook, at on Hoopla or at Overdrive/Libby, whichever is your app of choice, with your library card and your PIN number. I think you'll enjoy it. Give it a try. Drop me an email at lfinger@manliuslibrary.org to let me know how you liked it. Don't forget to drop on to the new Manlius Library Teen Services page. The website will be coming up to see other lists of other portal fantasies, mysteries, all kinds of books, good suggestions. And there's also a new reader's advisory form. Fill that out and we'll send you a list of books that we think that you will like. Thanks for joining me. I'm Lorie, the teen librarian at Manlius Library. This has been Every Hearted Doorway by Seanan McGuire. We'll see you next Tuesday right here on the Manlius Library YouTube channel at 4 o'clock. Have a great week.